She was the town's pariah, bearing the sins of a dead outlaw father. He was a reclusive mountain man, trusting only his rifle and his feral 5-year-old twins. But when two freezing little boys grabbed her tattered skirt in the snow and begged, "Pa, can we keep her?" a scandal was born that the unforgiving frontier would never forget. The winter of 1878 hit the Colorado Territory like a swung iron anvil. In the bustling mining camp of Silver Pines, survival was a matter of community, but for Josephine Mercer, she had been cast out into the cold long before the first snow fell. Josie was 22, with hollowed cheeks and hands blistered from chopping her own firewood. She was the daughter of Arthur Mercer, a notorious stagecoach robber and swindler who had swung from a Pinkerton noose 6 months prior. Arthur had left his daughter with nothing but a dilapidated shack on the edge of town and a surname that made people spit when she walked by. The good, God-fearing folks of Silver Pines had decided that the bad blood of a thief flowed through her veins. They wouldn't hire her to wash clothes, they wouldn't let her scrub floors, and as the bitter frost set in, they stopped selling her food entirely. Josie pushed open the heavy oak doors of O'Malley's general store, the wind howling at her back. She clutched a worn silver dollar, her very last coin, found beneath the floorboards of her father's empty cabin. "Mr. O'Malley." Josie's voice trembled as she approached the counter, pulling her threadbare shawl tighter around her thin shoulders. "I just need a sack of flour and a half-pound of salted pork. Please." Jeremiah O'Malley didn't even look up from his ledger. He reached under the counter, pulled out a rag, and began wiping the immaculate wood. "Store's closed to your kind, Miss Mercer." Sheriff Cobb made it clear. "We ain't harboring bandit spawn. Take your silver elsewhere before I call the law." "There is nowhere else," Josie whispered, tears of absolute desperation freezing on her eyelashes. "I haven't eaten in 4 days. Then I suggest you ride out. Maybe join up with whatever vermin your daddy rode with," spat Mrs. Gable, the town's wealthiest busybody, who was browsing the bolts of calico near the stove. "You've got a lot of nerve showing your face here." Defeated, Josie turned and walked back out into the blistering cold. The wind cut through her thin cotton dress like shattered glass. She stumbled toward the alleyway beside the mercantile, collapsing onto a stack of frozen shipping crates, burying her face in her hands. She was going to die here. The town was going to let her freeze to death, and they would likely sing hymns while she did. Inside the store, the bell above the door jingled violently. The heavy, unmistakable thud of snow-crusted leather boots echoed across the floorboards. Emmett Caldwell had come down from the high peaks. Emmett was a giant of a man, clad in a heavy buffalo hide coat, smelling of pine resin, wood smoke, and raw wilderness. A thick, dark beard framed a face carved by grief and harsh weather. 3 years ago, he had lost his wife to the mountain fever, leaving him to raise their twin boys alone at his remote trapping cabin on Widow's Peak. He only came to town twice a year to trade his pelts for supplies, and he despised every minute he spent among civilized folk. Trailing behind his massive frame were 5-year-old Caleb and Cody. The boys were completely wild. They wore oversized wool coats, their hair was long and unkempt, and they looked at the townspeople with the suspicious, wide eyes of cornered coyotes. "Keep your hands on the counter, boys," Emmett rumbled, his voice like grinding stones. He dropped a massive stack of prime beaver and fox pelts onto O'Malley's counter. "Flour, sugar, coffee, salt, and whatever boots you have that'll fit these two. Make it quick." While O'Malley nervously tallied the furs, the twins grew restless. Town was boring, loud, and smelled like horse manure. Caleb, the bolder of the two, nudged his brother, and together they slipped out the front door into the snow while their father argued over the price of sugar. The boys wandered around the side of the building, kicking at the ice, until Cody stopped dead in his tracks. Huddled against the crates was a woman. She was shivering so violently that her teeth clicked, her lips a dangerous shade of blue. Caleb approached her cautiously, like taming a stray dog. "Lady?" he squeaked. Josie slowly lifted her head. Through her blurred, tear-filled vision, she saw 2 identical little boys staring at her. Despite her agonizing hunger, her motherly instincts flared. They weren't wearing gloves. and their little knuckles were cherry red. She reached into her deep apron pocket and pulled out the only possession she had on her, a small wooden horse she had carved with a pocket knife to pass the lonely, starving hours. Her hands shook violently as she held it out. You shouldn't be out here without mittens, little ones," she whispered, her voice terribly weak. Cody took the wooden horse, his eyes lighting up. He stepped closer and touched Josie's frozen hand. He gasped, "You're colder than the ice on the creek." Without a second thought, the little boy unbuttoned his oversized wool coat, took it off, and clumsily draped it over Josie's shivering legs. Caleb immediately moved to her other side, wrapping his small, warm arms around her waist, trying to share his body heat. "Caleb! Cody!" The thunderous roar of Emmett Caldwell shook the alley. He rounded the corner, his Winchester rifle gripped tightly in one hand, panic in his eyes. When he saw his boys huddled around a ragged woman in the snow, his blood ran cold. "Get away from her!" Emmett barked, striding forward to snatch his sons back. But the twins didn't let go. Cody turned to his massive, intimidating father, stubbornly gripping Josie's tattered sleeve. "Pa, we can't leave her," Cody demanded, his little voice echoing in the alley. "She's freezing, and she gave me a pony." Emmett stopped, his eyes locking onto Josie. He recognized her, not her name, but the look in her eyes. It was the same hollow, desperate look a trapped animal gets right before it gives up the ghost. He saw the way the townspeople were peering out the mercantile window, pointing and whispering, offering no help to a dying woman. "She needs a fire, Pa," Caleb added, tugging on Emmett's heavy bearskin trousers. Then, looking up with complete, innocent sincerity, he asked, "Mama's gone, and she's cold. Can we keep her?" The words hung in the freezing air, heavy and impossible. Josie tried to pull away from the children, terrified of the towering mountain man standing over her. "I'm sorry," she stammered, her teeth chattering. I didn't ask them to." Emmett crouched down, his massive frame blocking the biting wind. Up close, Josie could see the silver threading through his dark hair and the deep, sorrowful lines around his eyes. He didn't look at her with the disgust the townspeople did. He looked at her with analytical precision. "You're Arthur Mercer's girl," Emmett stated flatly. It wasn't a question, it was a fact he had gleaned from the town's relentless gossip mill. "I'm not my father," Josie whispered fiercely, clinging to the last shred of her dignity. "I just wanted to buy flour." Emmett stood up, his jaw tight. He looked at his boys, who were staring up at him with expectant, demanding eyes, and then back at the mercantile window where O'Malley and Mrs. Gable were watching the spectacle with sneering judgment. Emmett Caldwell hated this town. He hated their self-righteousness. More importantly, he needed help. His traps were failing because he spent half the day making sure his wild sons didn't fall off a cliff or get eaten by a cougar. "Stand up," Emmett ordered. When Josie tried, her legs buckled. Without a word, Emmett handed his rifle to Caleb, scooped Josie up effortlessly in his thick tree-trunk arms, and carried her out of the alley. The bell to the general store jingled again, and the murmuring inside died instantly as Emmett kicked the door open, carrying the town pariah. "Caldwell, what in God's name are you doing?" Sheriff Cobb demanded, stepping out from the back room, his hand resting on his revolver. "That woman is a menace. We're running her out of Silver Pines." "She's coming with me," Emmett said, his voice booming through the quiet store. He looked down at O'Malley. "Add 2 extra blankets, 3 yards of thick wool, and a pair of women's snow boots to my tab. We're riding up to Widow's Peak." "Emmett, you've lost your mind." Mayor Harrison Briggs stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. "Her father stole $20,000 from the Territorial Bank. We have reason to believe she knows where that gold is buried. You take her up that mountain. You're harboring a fugitive of the county." Emmett's eyes narrowed into dangerous slits. "If she had $20,000, Briggs, she wouldn't be freezing to death in your alley over a sack of flour. She's coming to the peak to cook and watch my boys. Anyone who has a problem with that can take the trail up my mountain and discuss it with my Winchester." He turned on his heel and walked out, his boys trotting happily behind him. The ride up the mountain was agonizing. Josie rode in the back of Emmett's supply sled, wrapped in heavy furs, holding a heated stone to her chest. As they ascended, the town of Silver Pines disappeared beneath a thick canopy of snow-laden pines. The air grew thinner, colder, but for the first time in months, Josie felt a strange sense of safety. Emmett's cabin was a fortress built into the side of a granite cliff. It was a masculine, utilitarian space. Traps hung from the rafters, animal skins covered the floor, and the smell of raw leather was overpowering. "The boys sleep in the loft," Emmett told her gruffly as he carried the supplies inside. "You'll take the bed in the corner. I sleep on the cot by the fire. You cook, you mend clothes, you keep them from killing themselves while I run the trap lines. In exchange, you eat what we eat, and the town leaves you alone. Understand?" "Yes, Mr. Caldwell," Josie said, her voice steadying as the warmth of the roaring hearth brought the feeling back to her limbs. "Call me Emmett," he muttered, not looking at her. "And don't mistake this for charity. If you can't carry your weight, I'll drive you back down myself." For the next 3 weeks, a strange domestic rhythm settled over the cabin on Widow's Peak. Josie proved she was no fragile city girl. She scrubbed the soot-stained floors with lye, baked fresh sourdough bread that made the cabin smell like heaven, and painstakingly untangled the mats from the boys' hair. Caleb and Cody clung to her like burrs. For the first time since their mother died, they heard stories before bed and woke up to warm clothes placed by the fire. Emmett watched her in silence. He was a man locked in a cage of his own grief. He expected her to complain about the isolation, the lack of society, or the terrifying howl of the timber wolves at night. His late wife, Sarah, had been a delicate woman who despised the mountain. She had tried to flee back to Missouri in a winter storm and froze to death less than a mile from the cabin. Emmett blamed himself every single day. He waited for the mountain to break Josie, too. But Josie didn't break. She thrived. The mountain wasn't a prison to her. It was a sanctuary from the cruel judgment of the world below. One evening, while Emmett was sharpening his hunting knife by the fire, he caught Josie smiling as she mended a hole in Cody's trousers. The firelight danced across her face, softening the sharp angles of her cheeks, bringing out a faint flush of color. Emmett's chest tightened. He quickly looked away, burying the unfamiliar surge of warmth deep down. However, the peace of Widow's Peak was built on a fragile foundation. On a Tuesday, Emmett loaded his sled with prime winter pelts and told Josie he was heading down to Silver Pines to trade. "Lock the door from the inside," he instructed, his eyes lingering on her a second longer than usual. "Don't open it until you hear my whistle." By mid-afternoon, the sky turned a bruised, violent purple. A massive, unseasonal blizzard slammed into the Rockies, dumping 2 feet of snow in a matter of hours. Halfway down the mountain trail, Emmett's sled hit a hidden snowdrift, snapping the runner. Stranded, he was forced to take shelter in an old, abandoned mining cave, unable to see 2 feet in front of his face. Miles above him, at the cabin, the wind shrieked like a dying animal. Josie had the boys tucked into the loft, reading them a story by the light of an oil lamp, when the sound cut through the howling wind. Bang, bang, bang. Someone was hammering on the heavy oak door. Josie froze. It wasn't Emmett's whistle. The knocks were frantic, aggressive. "Pa?" Cody asked, peeking his head over the loft ladder. "Stay there," Josie whispered, her blood running cold. She crept toward the door, her hand instinctively grabbing the heavy iron fire poker. "Open up!" a muffled, raspy voice shouted from outside. "I know you're in there, little Josie. The town mayor told me exactly where to find you." Josie backed away, her heart hammering against her ribs. She knew that voice. It was Jasper Snakeskin Collins, her father's former right-hand man, the most ruthless killer in the Mercer gang. "I ain't freezing to death out here, Josie," Jasper yelled, violently rattling the iron latch. "Your daddy hid 20,000 in banknotes before they stretched his neck. You're gonna give me that map, or I'm gonna burn this cabin to the ground with you and those brats inside." Josie's grip on the heavy iron fire poker turned her knuckles bone white. The frantic hammering against the thick oak door echoed through the cabin, competing with the shrieking blizzard outside. I ain't playing games, Josie. Jasper Snakeskin, Collins bellowed, his voice raw and ragged from the freezing wind. Briggs said your daddy slipped you the ledger and the map before he swung. Hand it out here and maybe I let you and the brats live. There is no map, Jasper, Josie screamed back, her voice shaking but surprisingly loud. My father left me nothing but a ruined name. Go away. Up in the loft, Caleb and Cody were huddled together beneath a thick bear pelt, their wide eyes reflecting the flickering firelight. Josie backed away from the door, moving to stand directly beneath the loft ladder. She was terrified, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. But as she looked up at those two innocent little boys, the paralyzing fear morphed into something entirely different. It became a fierce, burning, maternal rage. The town had rejected her. Her father had ruined her. But these boys had offered her their coats and asked to keep her. Nobody was going to touch them. Smash. Jasper, realizing the reinforced oak door wouldn't yield, had moved to the cabin's only window. The heavy strike of a rifle butt shattered the thick glass and splintered the interior wooden shutter. Instantly, a violent gust of snow and sub-zero air blasted into the room, extinguishing the oil lamps and sending a flurry of white across the floorboards. Through the jagged hole, a gloved hand reached in, blindly grasping for the iron latch of the shutter. Josie didn't hesitate. She lunged forward and brought the iron poker down with all her might. A sickening crunch echoed above the howling wind, followed by Jasper's agonizing howl. The bloody hand yanked back, but the brief victory was short-lived. A deafening roar erupted as Jasper fired his revolver blindly through the shattered window. Wood splintered above Josie's head, showering her with debris. She dropped to her knees, crawling back toward the fireplace. "You're gonna pay for that, you little river rat," Jasper screamed. A moment later, the front door's heavy iron lock groaned. Jasper had shot the deadbolt from the outside. The door kicked open, slamming against the cabin wall. Jasper Collins stepped into the room, a swirling vortex of snow framing his silhouette. He was a terrifying sight, a tall, gaunt man with a face scarred by smallpox and a left eye that was clouded over and dead. Blood dripped from his crushed right hand, but his left hand held a heavy Colt revolver leveled squarely at Josie's chest. "Where is it?" he hissed, stepping inside and kicking the door shut behind him to block out the gale. "I told you," Josie breathed, raising the poker defensively. "I don't have any money. Arthur Mercer didn't have $20,000. Jasper spat a glob of blood onto the floorboards. "Don't lie to me. Mayor Briggs was the one who tipped off the stagecoach guards. He was working with us. We did the robbing. Briggs laundered the gold through his mercantile, and we split the profits. But your daddy got greedy. He hid the last haul. Briggs promised me that if I tracked you down and got it out of you, I'd get my half." Josie froze, the pieces of a terrible puzzle slamming into place. Mayor Harrison Briggs, the man who had organized the hanging of her father, the man who had riled up the town to starve her out. He wasn't a righteous leader. He was her father's partner in crime. Briggs had pushed for Arthur's swift execution to cover his own tracks, and he had made Josie the town pariah so no one would listen if she ever stumbled upon the truth. "Briggs played you, Jasper," Josie said, her voice steadying with sudden, sharp clarity. "There is no map. If there was, Briggs wouldn't have sent you out in a blizzard to find it. He sent you up here to die of exposure, or to get killed by Emmett Caldwell. He's tying up loose ends." Jasper's one good eye twitched. Doubt flickered across his ugly, scarred face. But then, his gaze drifted upward, settling on the loft where a tiny, frightened whimper had just escaped Cody's lips. An evil, yellow-toothed grin spread across the outlaw's face. "Maybe. But I reckon a mother will say anything to protect her cubs. Toss the poker, Josie, or I shoot the ceiling and let gravity do the rest." He raised the Colt, aiming it directly at the thin wooden floorboards of the loft. "No!" Josie shrieked. She threw the heavy iron poker across the room. It clattered uselessly against the stone hearth. "Please, leave them out of this." "Then start talking," Jasper sneered, stepping closer, his gun still raised toward the boys. "Count of 3. 1. Josie fell to her knees, weeping in frustration and terror. "I swear to you, I have nothing." 2. Jasper's finger tightened on the trigger. From outside, buried beneath the howling shriek of the blizzard, came a sound that made the hair on the back of Josie's neck stand up. It wasn't the wind. It was a roar, a primal, earth-shattering roar of absolute fury. The shattered window exploded inward. It wasn't a gunshot. It was a man. Emmett Caldwell came through the jagged opening like a vengeful mountain spirit, a massive blur of snow-crusted buffalo hide, and pure, unadulterated violence. He had abandoned his sled halfway down the mountain, driven by an inexplicable, agonizing dread that had settled in his gut when the storm hit. He had climbed the last 3 miles in whiteout conditions, driven by a desperate, burning need to get back to the woman and the children who had finally made his cabin feel like a home again. When he had crested the ridge and heard the gunshot from his cabin, Emmett had shattered every physical limit his body possessed to reach the porch. Jasper spun around, wildly firing the Colt. The bullet grazed Emmett's heavy coat, but the mountain man didn't even flinch. Before Jasper could cock the hammer again, Emmett was on him. Emmett didn't use a weapon. He used his bare hands. He slammed into the outlaw with the force of a falling pine tree, driving Jasper backward until they crashed through the heavy oak dining table, shattering it into kindling. Jasper screamed as Emmett's massive, calloused hand clamped around his throat, pinning him to the floor. The outlaw clawed desperately at Emmett's face, but Emmett felt nothing. His eyes were wide and feral, his jaw set in stone. He raised his right fist, a fist the size of a ham hock, hardened by years of splitting logs and breaking ice, and brought it down across Jasper's jaw. The sickening crack echoed through the cabin. Jasper went limp instantly, his eyes rolling back in his head. Emmett stayed kneeling over the unconscious outlaw, his chest heaving, his breath pluming in the freezing air of the cabin. Slowly, the red haze of fury faded from his vision. He turned his head, his eyes frantically scanning the room. Josie was still on the floor, shaking violently, her dress torn from crawling over the debris. "Josie," Emmett breathed. His gruff, intimidating demeanor vanished entirely. He scrambled across the ruined floorboards and dropped to his knees in front of her. His massive, trembling hands gently gripped her shoulders. "Are you hurt? Did he touch you?" "I'm all right," she sobbed, collapsing forward against his chest. Emmett wrapped his arms tightly around her, burying his face in her hair. For a man who had sworn off the world, he clung to her as if she were the only thing anchoring him to the earth. "I thought I lost you," he whispered fiercely into the quiet cabin. "I thought I was too late." "Pa." 2 little bodies practically leaped from the loft ladder. Caleb and Cody scrambled across the floor and threw themselves at Emmett and Josie, creating a tangled, tearful knot of arms on the cabin floor. Josie pulled the boys tightly against her sides, burying her face in their warm necks. Emmett looked down at the 3 of them, the broken, outcast woman, and his 2 wild, motherless boys. In that fleeting moment amid the wreckage of his home, he realized what Caleb had known the very first day in the alley. They weren't broken pieces. They were exactly what each other needed to be whole. The storm raged through the night, but inside, the fire was stoked high. Emmett bound Jasper Collins with heavy trapping wire and dragged him into the root cellar to freeze the fight out of him. When morning finally broke, the blizzard passed, leaving the Rocky Mountains bathed in brilliant, blinding sunlight. Emmett hitched his strongest draft horses to a heavy winter wagon. They loaded Jasper Collins into the back like a sack of feed. But they didn't ride down to Silver Pines. "Sheriff Cobb is in Briggs's pocket," Emmett told Josie as he handed her up onto the wagon seat, wrapping a thick wool blanket over her lap. "We're bypassing the town. We're taking this trash straight to the U.S. Marshals in Denver." The journey took 4 grueling days. When they arrived, Emmett dragged Jasper before a federal judge. Broken, freezing, and terrified of the giant mountain man standing over him, Jasper Collins confessed to everything. He sang like a canary about the stagecoach robbery, Arthur Mercer's framing, and Mayor Harrison Briggs's grand scheme of corruption and murder. A week later, a detachment of heavily armed federal marshals rode into Silver Pines. The arrogant Mayor Briggs was dragged out of his mercantile in irons, screaming about his rights, while Sheriff Cobb surrendered his badge without a fight. The town watched in stunned, terrified silence as their wealthy, self-righteous leaders were hauled away to federal prison. The federal court officially pardoned Arthur Mercer posthumously. As compensation for the wrongful execution and the seizure of her father's property, the territorial government awarded Josie Mercer the recovered $20,000 in stolen gold, plus the deed to the mercantile Briggs had built with dirty money. Suddenly, the town of Silver Pines, the same people who had sneered at her and let her starve in an alley, were begging for her forgiveness, hoping the new wealthiest woman in the county would show them mercy. But Josie didn't care about their apologies. She didn't want the mercantile. She sold it to Mr. O'Malley at a steep discount, took her money, and walked out of the town that had tried to destroy her. She hired a carriage to take her to the base of the mountain trail. Waiting there, standing beside a pair of sturdy mountain horses, was Emmett. He looked uncomfortable in the valley, his eyes constantly scanning the tree line, but when he saw Josie step out of the carriage, his guarded expression melted away into a soft, genuine smile. "You're rich now," Emmett said gruffly, though his eyes betrayed his nervousness. "You could go anywhere. San Francisco, New York. You don't have to freeze up on that peak anymore." Josie walked up to the towering mountain man, reached up, and gently rested her hand against his bearded cheek. "I don't want New York, Emmett. I want the sound of the wind. I want sourdough bread by the fire. And I want to see if Caleb and Cody have finally managed to catch that frog in the creek." Emmett's large hand came up to cover hers. "They're waiting for you. They've been driving me crazy asking when their mama is coming home." Josie's heart swelled. She smiled, a radiant, beautiful expression that the harsh winter could never touch again. "Then take me home, Emmett." Together, they mounted the horses and rode up into the timberline. They left the judgment, the greed, and the cruelty of the world far beneath them, choosing instead the quiet, unbreakable bond of a family forged in the snow, a mountain man, his two wild boys, and the outcast woman who had finally found exactly where she belonged. Did the twist with the corrupt mayor catch you off guard? If you loved this story of redemption and frontier justice, please like this video, share it with your friends who love a good Western drama, and subscribe to our channel for more thrilling tales of the wild frontier.